morning. Really excited for all of us to be here. Today's topic is make pipe, not war, proven strategies to overcome sales marketing conflict and drive superior results. Wait, everyone's trickling in and the numbers look really incredible. We're going to give everyone a minute or so we can get started. To give you an indication of what the agenda looks like today, we're going to probably chat for around 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. I'll be looking after the Q&A, so if you have anything that you want to ask, please do so. I'll collate all those questions and ask them either towards the end, or if I think a question's really pertinent, I'll bring it into the fold depending on what the topic is. We'll give everyone another minute. Thank you to everyone else who has been on time.
Subtle jab at everybody who's not on time. I like it.
We're not here to hear that jab.
I love that so many people are on to learn more about attribution.
Everybody's favorite topic, right? It's actually everybody's favorite topic is how to not have attribution turn into a war is probably the reality.
Yeah, and I'm also really excited, Jordan, to kind of, you and Stephanie are opposite ends of the sales and marketing relationship, and then you've got Greg in the middle around, well, this is what we need to get done. So it's actually going to be a fantastic conversation that we're all going to have. Why don't we get started since it's past 9? So hi everyone, my name is Ursula A. Root. I'll be your host today. I have a small marketing agency based out of San Francisco that specializes in helping B2B startups drive and accelerate growth with their marketing pipeline. So we also have on the call Stephanie Chang. Stephanie is an exceptional a marketing operations leader. She's worked at companies like Splunk and is currently at Okta. You guys are going to learn so much from Stephanie's wisdom today. The other person we have is Jordan Henderson. Jordan runs also sales operations, and he's got an incredible podcast. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend it. And finally, we have Greg Poirier. He's the CEO and esteemed leader for Cloud Kettle. He helps companies with all of their marketing and sales operation needs. If you've got hairy problems, I call Greg first to really help me figure it out before I do anything else. So he's really wonderful. So today's topic is all around attribution, make pipe, not war. So attribution and who should get credit of every piece of the pipeline is one of the most contentious topics in the often complex relationship between sales and marketing. At its best, it helps steer resources and optimizes efforts. At its worst, it becomes a zero-sum blame game and a waste of everyone's efforts. So we're going to be talking about that today. Stephanie, I have the first question, and I'd like to have you respond to it today. Why should I care about attribution?
Yep. So like you mentioned, right, at its best, it's really used to make sure that you're measuring the effectiveness of your investments. And in today's market, especially with the budget constraints that we have, the resource constraints that we're facing, it's even more important to understand, the ROI that you're getting, whether it's in marketing, it's in your sales, XDR organization, your channel organization, in terms of what they're doing in creation of pipe.
Right. And then how has it shifted given the market conditions that we're in? A lot of us haven't grown up in the era where there was an abundance in marketing budgets and abundance in pipeline. How have the conversations shifted in order to accommodate this new way of market conditions?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that have changed. In the time of constraint, obviously pipe creation is still very much top of the funnel, is still very much a big focus for everyone. Obviously, quantity is key. If you don't have enough pipe, it makes it that much harder to land your numbers. However, I think with the constraints that we're facing now, the middle and the bottom of the funnel has now become that much more important. It's not just about pure quantity anymore. It's really about making sure that the quality and the velocity of your pipeline is also there. think that's one of the major shifts that I've seen in the current conditions.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find really interesting, I'm working with a bunch of companies, and finding new business is really challenging right now. So a lot of companies are actually focusing on expansion. How do you do attribution when it's expansion, when you know that the account managers and the sales folks actually own those accounts? How does marketing get credit for expansion accounts around attribution?
Yeah. So regardless if it's, brand awareness and building pipe either for a prospect or for it's- all you should be leveraged, right? Whether that's marketing, your sales organization, your post-sale organization. So I think at the end of the day, attribution is just a model. So irregardless of first touch, last touch, some weighting of stuff in between, I think the important thing for most companies is to just land on the model and really focus all your resources on driving clarity and alignment on pipe, right? So if the strategy is to really focus on your customer base, then your marketing organization would really want to do cross-sell campaigns, for example, right? Your sales organization probably wants to partner a lot closer with your post-sale organization, the CSMs, your renewals, right? To really understand what's going on within the customer, the different accounts, what their immediate problem statements are, how your product or your services can really be leveraged to help address any new challenges that they might be facing in this time and age. And so I think instead of really debating and fighting about what is the right attribution model, take away that internal friction, just land on a decision, and instead really push everyone to focus on facing our external situation right now, right? Make sure you have clarity and alignment. Make sure that you have adherence to your operational rigor. That ties back to how the middle and the top and the bottom of the funnel is more critical now, right? And make sure you have common success metrics, because right now it's really about you either all win or you're all in trouble in terms of hitting your bookings.
You mentioned something when we had a practice session, which I learned quite a bit from. You mentioned something around the concept of pipeline inspection and things like that. Can you walk us through what that means and how you're doing it today at Okta?
Yeah, so I think if you break it down, there's pipe velocity, which is basically how quickly your pipe is moving through your different sales stations, right? And then there's pipe maturity, which is how are you getting your different leads, how are you nurturing them through the different sales process. I think those two things are equally important, and you want to monitor them differently. Pipe velocity is just really about inspection of, how your set of opportunities, your set of leads, right? How quickly are you advancing them? Are you working? Are your first line managers, the second line managers working with your sales reps to really inspect the progress of that pipe, right? You don't want it sitting for too long in early stages, if because qualification hasn't occurred. You really want to be pushing your resources to focus on making sure they go through all the stages. Now, when you think about maturation of the pipe, you want to make sure your reps, your managers, your pre-sales organization, like everybody in the field is actually trained to think about, how do you qualify, what is the best way to qualify that pipeline? What is the best way to really, demonstrate value, right? Is that a proof of concept? Is that a demo, right? Is that a technical conversation, right? And then you also at the same time want to make sure you're training and coaching your field organization to not just talk about the technical value of your product and services, but also like the contracts, the negotiate. You want to get that done in parallel and not in serial, because you don't want to get to a stage where you've gone through everything, you proved your value, and then you're at the point of negotiation and you think everything's going to go through, but something in the process stops. And that something typically nowadays is because the CFO or the true budget holder that has shifted over the past few months, right, with the current market conditions, because that budget holder is not conscious that this is an opportunity that's going through. This is something that the business is pursuing. They don't understand the value because the field has spent the entire time really talking to just the business and not to the actual budget holder.
Got it. So basically what I'm hearing is agree on it, put it in a box and move on and start thinking about pipeline velocity, pipeline inspection, and then pipeline closing. So Jordan, I have a question for you. Do you agree with what Stephanie has said from a sales perspective? Is that how the sales teams and the sales operation leaders feel? It's like, let's put it in a box and move on? Or what's your perspective?
Yeah, no, I agree. Put it in a box and move on. There's an important thing that happens, and I think it's everybody listening to this is here for a reason. We've all sat in the room where a sales leader and a marketing leader screamed at each other about whether or not this deal came from marketing or sales, right? Like everybody's had that experience. It's a terrible experience. Everybody wants to avoid that. Put it in a box, have a firm definition that catches all the edge cases so that you can just say, here's the rule, apply the rule, here's the outcome, right? It eliminates the conversation. What's really important with that, though, is once it's in the box, you're staying with it for a long time. Like
Yeah.
you're not, because too frequently this also turns into, well, I get that it fits the definition and marketing will take it, but now I want to change the definition, like change our attribution rules. I want to change this thing. And that makes all the data useless. Because if I'm consistently changing how I'm doing this, then all of my historic data is changing, which means it's not like the trend data is then flawed tremendously. And I can't make decisions moving forward based on that, right? And that's the whole goal of this thing. It's not to fight. The whole goal is to be able to make decisions moving forward. If I can't do that, why am I doing attribution to begin
And
with?
and do you find, there's been a lot of turnover with sales and marketing leadership, and do you
Yes,
find that
that's
it's yeah, that's where people come in and say, okay, well, let's assess it, and here's my 2 cents on how to adjust it. What's your advice there? Because I can imagine everyone
they
on
don't
the
own it.
phone
They don't own it. Ops
say that.
owns. Yeah.
Okay,
So yeah, no, it's a great question, but like because of the turnover, because of that, right? So two things that I would do on that is one, ops owns attribution, just has to. We build the thing. And I'm RevOps. So I sit across marketing and sales. It's mine. Attribution is my model. It's my own. I want your inputs. I want your sign off on it. Sales and marketing. I want to align you. My job is to align you. I'm also going to pull the CEO or the CRO into that conversation so that they're aligned to it too. Right. And because of that, if the VP of sales leaves or the VP of marketing leaves, new one comes in. This is not, hey, let's rebuild this from scratch. It's, hey, here's the attribution model we work with. And I'm going to present
I,
it to you and we'll walk through it together.
I
Right.
love that, and I wonder if there's something there to be said that you lead revenue operations, so you don't lead sales operations, you don't lead marketing operations. You lead the concept of revenue operations, which is both sales and marketing. And do you feel like by having that title about revenue, you actually are kind of Switzerland, you're neutral, you want what's best for both parties, so you come in then into the conversation saying, hey, this is what it looks like, it's fair for everyone, nobody's edging out the other person. Do you find that works better than having a sales ops team and a marketing ops team?
1,000%. I have no loyalty, right? The reason this is important because at the end of the day, as a RevOps leader, my job is to grow the business. That's
Mhm.
it. That's the whole goal of what I do. And so I don't care if I grow that business by marketing. I don't care if I grow that business by investing more in sales. What I care is that I have a limited budget and I have to make decisions and we have to make decisions and I have to make suggestions as a strategic RevOps leader as to where we're using that budget to maximize its impact, right? So if I'm looking at attribution again as the core thing here, I need it to be right. I need historic trend data to be appropriate. I don't care about the nuanced things. I just need it to be such that I can trust it to make decisions and recommendations for the business that are going to grow revenue. And if
Okay.
that means I'm investing in marketing, I'm investing in marketing. If that means I'm investing in customer success, I'm investing in customer success. Right. And that sort of like lack of loyalty, total Switzerland thing is extremely important.
Got it. And
That's
then,
what I
yeah,
was
jump in.
because I 100% agree with what Jordan just said. Like looking, owning revenue operations, meaning end-to-end go-to-market, really helps make sure that you have the data-centric approach, right? The operational like rigor, the focus on process that's end-to-end that helps achieve the company's goals. So like 100% agree with Jordan. You've got to be Switzerland. You've got to be looking at all the different components to really understand like what is the right driver for the company's success, not for sales success, not for renewal success or marketing success, but for like the entire company.
I love that. So revenue operation exists to help drive company success forward, super neutral, etc. I want to shift back to attribution for a second. And Jordan, this is a question for you and Stephanie as well. Those edge cases they take up 80% of our time, and those become the most contentious edge cases. Well, what about this? What about that? How do you deal with those edge cases?
I don't know that I have a great answer to that because I hate it.
We all
But
hate it.
yeah, no, I mean, the reality is I've sat in situations where we did like a monthly meeting to talk through edge cases and sorted them out, right? And I've done that with VPs of sales and VPs of marketing. I've also done it with just the operations team, like, hey, marketing ops, sales ops, and RevOps, we're going to sit down once a month and go through that. The latter was much more productive, by the way, with avoiding fight, because operators tend to be very like, I just want it to be right then versus anything else. And so I think the thing is goes back to how you set your definition to avoid edge cases, right? And so one of the things that I would recommend is you don't just say this. We're going to sit down. We're going to do a 1 week on site, and we're going to come up with an attribution, like all of our definitions for attribution. We're going to put it in a box and be locked for the next 2 years. It's probably going to take you a couple months to really get that first definition right, and then lock it in for a couple years. But you probably want to like use 2 or 3 months worth of data. You could even use the last 2 or 3 months worth of data, push it through that attribution model, make sure it's right, and that you're accounting for as many of those edge cases as possible, because you can get it right and account for those.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of just avoid that altogether, because that whole like, here's an edge case that's a $2 million deal thing is just a terrible experience.
It is a terrible experience. And Greg, you're nodding your head, and you have to implement all these edge cases and as well implement all the attribution models and know how consistent are attribution models across different companies. So do they look different in companies that are around, under 10 million in ARR? Do they look different for companies under 50? And what do they look like for companies over 100? Do you see difference in these models? Oh, we can't hear you, Greg.
We got
the model does not tend to get more or less complicated by the size of the organization. In my experience, it's more or less complicated depending on how complicated somebody in usually marketing operations, not sales operations, wants to make it. The challenge with marketing operations is, and I'm guilty of this too. That was my role at one point in life, is you want to build a perfect attribution model, and you get into this world of wanting to perfectly count how much influence the newsletter had versus the webinar versus the trade show versus each of these things. Sales operations, purely defined or distilled, tend to be less concerned about that, because they're kind of worried about, like, did it come from an SDR? Did it come from a BDR? Did it come from a partner? Or is it expansion, cross sell, upsell with CSMs? But even that's like 4 possible channels. But I think the great crime of people in marketing often is that, and CMOs allow this and they should not, the great crime is they let the models get too complicated. And Jordan and I have had this discussion before. If you need to pull somebody into a room for that person to explain your attribution model, and they can't do it in under a minute, it's not going to work, because you can't have these meetings where the CEO and the CMO and the CRO and pipeline counsel are like puzzling through how this complicated attribution model works. So generally, especially for smaller organizations, I like to see a first touch attribution model that at Salesforce was called the 4 horses, which was, there's 4 legs in the revenue stool. There's marketing, there is sales generated, there's partner, and there's expansion, cross sell, upsell. And, for most organizations, until you get to a pretty big size, that is a good model. Mm-hmm. And it does not allow for a lot of debate. It is a very black and white model. And for that reason, we really like it. It's also easy to implement and measure and report on over time. So, if you have a 15-point multi-attribution model, trying to focus on the things that matter, like Stephanie was saying about, okay, well, what channel is generating velocity for us, because we need to close some deals now. So what's our channel that has the highest velocity? What is our channel that has the highest close rate? If you've got this really complicated multi-touch attribution model, you spend all your time focusing on that instead of focusing on the velocity, what's closing, so that you can make decisions on the fly to resource or pull resources back from a channel that's working or not working, which is what really matters. That's what you want to be able to do.
Got it. What tools, Stephanie and Jordan and Greg, are you seeing that really help make the model so simple, like a simplified model? So that's my first question. And the second question is actually for the audience. The audience, I'd love to know how many of you can actually explain the model in a minute or less. And it's a quick email to your boss. So second question is, shoot me a chat and tell me, can you put together the model quickly and answer it in a minute? And then the second question is, well, what are the tools to enable like a really efficient attribution model? Greg, do you want to start with that?
I like to see it done if you're really small and you're starting out just based on pure lead source, assuming you're using Salesforce, and hopefully everybody is. But if you're really small, I like to see it based on lead source, and maybe you have 8 lead sources somewhere around there, and each one of those fit into one of the 4 legs of that stool I was discussing, and that's how you measure it. Then as you mature, I like to see it based on the native campaign object in Salesforce, and each of the marketing automation platforms integrate with that. And then you can get more complicated in terms of keeping your first touch attribution, where each campaign that's created can have one of those 4 attribution sources attached to it as a custom field. And then when you move to multi-touch, if you're doing that in the background to optimize marketing, you can still use that native campaign object with some more complicated infrastructure over it.
Got it. A question from one of the group members is, what happens if there is an other group to attribution? How do you approach this conversation with GTM teams when there isn't an entered source? Do you just default to created? This is an edge case, you guys.
No, this is a fun one, because this is going to make me sound like a bad RevOps person, but I don't care, because I get really angry about attribution conversations sometimes, and I think everybody does. So I have had another. I've created another, shared, right? For me, it goes back to what's the point of attribution? To make decisions about where to invest our time, budget, all the things, right? How accurate does my attribution model have to be for my decisions to be right? 90%, 85%. If I have a B+ model, that's going to inform the same decision as an A+ model, right? 100%, 90% makes no difference on where my decision would land about where to invest my budget. So if I'm spending every month at the end of the month saying we closed $1 million in revenue, and the sales and marketing, we want to argue about where 50K came from, I don't care. Yeah. The rest of the model is accurate. So I literally did this at a company, and I don't know if I recommend it, but it was very effective, is I created a shared attribution, like category essentially, and they'd be like, well, I want to argue about this one. I'd look at it and go, cool, they're shared. Nobody gets credit for it. You get this for this, because all they're trying to do is put together board slides, right? Yeah. They're trying to put together a board slide that says, here's what I did, here's what I did, and they want the numbers to add up to the total thing. Cool, the numbers add up, there's a shared category, neither of you get credit. That's the end of the day. I get the data that I want to make a decision. I don't care about the rest.
Brutal, ruthless, Jordan, I like it. Stephanie, what's your perspective?
That's how I operate with my children. You guys can't just, it's mine. Nobody gets it. So, but I agree with Jordan. The edge case is honestly sometimes like the death of our ability to actually be data centric and leverage data to really make the right decisions. So for me, I go back to, does it make a difference, right? And I think that's, Jordan, that's what you're is. If it doesn't make a difference and doesn't change the direction, then ignore the edge case, because it doesn't change what you need to go and do. And this is why I think it's so important, going back to that clarity and alignment at the company level. If you have that North Star, then every decision that you look at, every data point you're looking at, right, should just be, does this change how we get to that North Star? And the answer to that is no, then put that aside. It doesn't matter.
Got it. Greg, anything from your perspective?
No, I would agree completely. And I think, just to reinforce what Jordan said, what matters most is, does this allow us to make a decision quickly, during the fog of war, and invest in the right place that we need to invest with 13 days left in the quarter, or 1 month left in the fiscal year, or whatever the case may be? That's where attribution matters. And anything else is really somebody fighting over credit, which doesn't matter for the thing that we're talking about that's urgent, which is, how do we close sales and hit our number before the quarter end or year end? And that other conversation that is about, who gets credit, and that's about
Right.
paychecks, and it's not,
It's just
not
pride.
unimportant, but it doesn't matter today.
Yeah, it's ego. It's just an
Yes.
ego conversation at the end of the day.
Well, compensation too, but yeah.
Well, there's that. Yeah.
So we had a couple of responses in how quickly can you describe your attribution model, and the one that pops out the best to me is Cloud Kettle did ours, so obviously it's less than a minute explanation. So I thought that was a nice touch. So I have a bunch of questions for you guys that I'm going to go into because these questions are actually really fascinating. So Chitra says, much easier to attribute in SMB, more marketing-led, right, than in enterprise where both marketing and sales are playing. Interested in thoughts on differences in your view?
Oh, can I answer that one?
Yeah,
Yes.
go for it.
So I don't know if this is exactly what that person is getting at, because it depends if they're a pure SMB sales cycle or if they're an organization with a combination. But one mistake a lot of organizations make is that they assume all pipeline from a specific channel is equal. And once you get to your more complex model, my preference is not that you add further legs to the stool. I like the 4 legs. My preference is that as you get more sophisticated, you carve it out by size of organization. So, marketing is responsible for generating 40% of our pipeline in this 4-legged stool, but almost all of that is SMB. So they're 40% of our total pipeline, 90% of our SMB pipeline. And then sales is responsible for 35% of pipeline generated, but almost all of that is enterprise. Because you know what? Depending on what your definition of enterprise is, marketing's ability to get the CMO of, T-Mobile, into the sales funnel might be limited. But sales is, if you have some big rainmaker, sales' ability to do that is probably more extreme. So, it's about segmenting those 4 legs of the stool within SMB, mid-market, enterprise. And then again, as you get more sophisticated and you become international, you're starting to do it by language and territory, et cetera. Because, as an example, if you're feeding a huge amount of pipe and qualified leads to SDRs in France, that's great. But it's not that the German team necessarily could take that overage because they don't speak French, maybe, and they're not going to be able to handle that. So you actually have to be able to look at it like, okay, if we have too much in one pot and not enough in the other, can it be redirected? But once you're big at a certain size, it can't be, and that starts to matter.
Got it. Second question, I think, Stephanie, this is probably for you. How are you handling attribution for ABM campaigns, or basically any initiative where different departments are working together?
I think this goes back to a little bit of what Greg and what we said earlier, right? As an organization becomes more complex, does not mean you create a more complex attribution model, right? You keep it simple under that 1 minute, right? But what you do is you get more granular, whether it's by segments, by international, or frankly, you start to look at, top of the funnel activity, middle of the funnel activity, bottom of the funnel activity. You can start to segment that way to understand that where should each of your pipeline levers be contributing and how.
Jordan, anything for you there to add?
Nothing. I mean, the thing for the ABM thing that's always tricky is everybody always wants to think of attribution as it's either marketing or it's sales or all the above, right? Get out of that. Go back to what do I actually want to know to make a decision here? And what I want to know is what came from ABM versus what came from marketing versus what came from sales versus that, right? So just knowing that it came from ABM tells you I should go invest in more ABM. Or we invested a bunch of money in ABM and everything either came just from our paid social or our sales cold outreach. ABM isn't working. Let's dump it or let's reformat that, right? What are you actually trying to uncover here? And if you take, by the way, if you say we're going to spend 30% or 40% or 80% of our marketing budget on ABM, but then we're going to use our attribution model and that's either going to be flagged as sales or marketing, then you're not going to be able to answer the question of how is ABM going, which is going to be really problematic, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so just, I guess, don't worry. My answer is don't worry about this as much as you're worrying about this. Just knowing it's coming from ABM is 90% of the battle.
Yeah, that's a really fair point, and I like that. Another question we have from the audience, should we give more weight to early stage or late stage touch points in our attribution model? Stephanie, what's your take on that? Is first touch the holy grail, or is it late stage touch?
I think it goes back to, again, there's no right answer, right?
Yeah.
Attribution at the end of the day is simply that. It's a way to like carve up a pie into different pieces. And to what Jordan said earlier, the more you debate how you carve that up, the more you change, the less insights you're going to be able to get because you have no historical trend. And like ideally, you like 3 to 6 years of data. So just think about it. If you're changing a model every time, you're resetting yourself and you have no visibility into what you really should be doing.
Stephanie, but what about if it's a startup that's just starting out and they're starting their journey to, is $1 million ARR a good time to do attribution, or is that just overkill? Jordan, question also for you, like, when do I start attribution for a startup, and is first touch more important than saying the
When you're brand new, go back to what Greg was talking about earlier, just lead source. Like that's all you need to know when you're $1 million company. It doesn't have to get more complex than that. You can worry about, building something more complex in the future, but at the start, I mean, you're trying to find product market fit. You're trying to like refine your ICP, your TAM, SAM. Like there's so much that's going to change anyways. That attribution isn't going to inform your decisions as much as it could, right? Like attribution really only helps you decide where to spend when you've got your TAM, SAM buttoned up, you've got your ICP buttoned up, you've got product market fit. Like those things are locked. So now you're figuring out how to go to market, right? You're $1 million company. You don't even know what market you're going to. And so don't worry about that yet.
So when do I start worrying? When do I start? Is it at the 5
When
million?
when you know what market you're going to, actually, is the way I would, yeah. Like when I feel really good about my product market fit and I feel like I've got my ICP pretty buttoned up, so everything is in a good place, then I'm hopefully I have some version of an attribution model in place so I can have a little bit of historic data, but really that's when I want to make sure that I'm looking at attribution as a decision-making mechanism.
Okay, so it's when you have ICP and product market fit. So it could be any company, maybe they're at the $1 million stage and they're ready, or it could be, hey, let's wait for $5 to $10 million. So that's very true. I just got a question around pipeline council. Do you guys do it? Is it a cool thing? Should we avoid it? Leadership wants to start putting one together. What do you guys think?
What is a pipeline council? What does that mean?
Well, Stephanie, do you want to describe a pipeline council?
So maybe I'll answer that question together with your prior question. At the end of the day, if all you're going to do with a pipeline council is have a meeting between your marketing team, your sales team, your partner teams to like debate their contribution to pipe, it's not effective. It's a waste of time, however much hours you're spending, right? Not only in the meeting, but prepping for the meeting because everyone's going to come and ask for their piece of flesh, right? If your pipeline council is really going to be your different levers coming together to really discuss, how are we going to achieve our goals, right? Here are the common success metrics that we all say, if we hit these metrics, we win. If we don't, then we all need to figure out what we can be doing to drive towards that. Like that is a much better use of that time and the better use of your resourcing to kind of walk away with a plan and an action to really achieve, going back to achieving the company's goals, not marketing or sales or partner teams' goals.
Yeah, I think the cardinal sin of pipeline council and where wheels are going to fall off really quickly is as soon as people start talking about what happened in the past. So pipeline council needs to be extremely focused because you have your most important people in the organization in the room. You've got your CRO, you've got your CMO, you probably have your CEO, and then you have one or two other people helping answer questions. But if you start talking about what happened and who gets credit, that's a waste of everybody's time. Pipeline council should be really focused on, okay, our revenue operations team has dug in and we are going to be light in Q2 in pipeline for EMEA and we're not going to hit our number. How do we reallocate resources to shore that up? We've got a lot of pipeline coming in the summer for our APAC team, and there's going to be a lot of vacations there. And we don't know that continuing to invest in marketing there in the near term is going to be fruitful. So does it make sense to pull some of those dollars out and do something else? Like, it's really about how are we going to allocate resources to ensure that we hit this quarter, next quarter, and the quarter after, and spotting where the gaps are so that you can get ahead of them. But if that's not what's happening, it's probably not a very good use of time.
Very cool. All right, I have another question, and I'm kind of curious about this one myself. What are the best tools for the data-driven attribution that uses machine learning to determine the relative contribution of each marketing touch point? Silence. What does that mean, you guys?
I got nothing on that one. I'm not even aware of a tool that's using machine learning to determine attribution touch. I got nothing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be 15 of them next month, but you know, I would go back to the, you know, there has been, Salesforce had for a while, although it wasn't very popular. There wasn't really much adoption. There have been black box machine learning models that come up with attribution. The problem is that because you can't inspect them and see how the answer was arrived at, the DNA of most organizations reject them outright. And we have seen and helped companies deploy a few of those. But again, because the answer of, well, why did this end up in this bucket and not that bucket, cannot be answered in under a minute because it's a black box algorithm, the DNA of most organizations reject those models. So, yeah, we're not huge fans over here of that type of thing.
Very cool. I think that's a really wise answer as well. Another question is, if RevOps holds the model, how do you understand what changes marketing or sales or even CS is making that are producing different results? How do you then go into these conversations for groups who are either overperforming or underperforming compared to trend? Jordan?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would actually posit that you'll have a greater understanding of how the changes across your revenue org will impact attribution if RevOps owns it. And the reason why is if marketing or sales or somebody like that owns it, is they're really focused on their org. They're not seeing what's happening across the revenue organization, right? As a RevOps professional, I can tell you there are very seldom changes in marketing, sales, SDR, customer success that RevOps isn't aware of and participating in. And so when attribution models are coming out, RevOps is lockstep with every piece of that, right? And so we're looking at it cross-functionally. And like an example of that is think of a scenario where marketing might say, hey, we did this healthcare campaign and the conversion rates were through the roof. We generated all this pipeline. Like, obviously healthcare campaign is awesome and that's great. They're not aware that the sales team changed the way they route healthcare leads to the most experienced SDRs, and so they're getting converted at a higher clip. Like, there are other changes happening across the organization that are also contributing to that, right? RevOps is aware of that, right? So when they enter that conversation with the marketing leader, this is all data that everybody should know. And then they enter the conversation with the SDR leader, it's the same thing. So I would actually posit that it gives you more visibility because RevOps should be, in its purest form, like at the hip with marketing and at the hip with sales and at the hip with CS for every change that's happening. In fact, they should be recommending many of those changes, right? And and then recommending and also tracking the impact of those things all the way back to things like attribution. So in that regard, I think it actually is going to be a lot more visibility than being held in any specific silo.
I think the other benefit there is that there tend to be fewer sacred cows. So, you know, you're going to have a CMO who's really passionate about events. You're going to have a CRO who's really passionate about some specific thing. And RevOps being independent, ideally, they tend to not care as much about not, you know, making their boss angry when they show that $1 million event had a negative impact in terms of revenue, or that these really expensive roundtable customer sessions in 8 different cities that sales has been hosting, you know, actually cost the company more than they brought back in. So that, you know, I like it for a very different reason than Jordan. Not that his reason isn't valid, but the reason I like it is that the revenue operations team, if they're not, you know, sometimes marketing operations rolls to marketing, sometimes sales operations rolls to sales. I like that independence because it allows them to not have to worry as much about showing bad data. And that's often where you see things that are often unheralded start to get attention. So like, hey, look at our newsletter. That's, you know, the little engine that could. We spend almost no money on it. And it's just chugging along, generating 15 MQLs a month. Go little guy. You know, you tend to get that awareness in a way that you wouldn't if it was if they were rolling up to sales or marketing.
Got it. So I'm going to throw a pickle into our conversation. What happens when I need to change the attribution model? So Stephanie, you just mentioned that you got a note from one of your old colleagues. Hey, we might consider changing our attribution model. When do we change the attribution model? Is it based on company inflection? Is it based on going into new markets? Is it introducing a freemium product? When do we actually open up the box and then say, okay, now we need to change it to reflect the new market conditions or to reflect our new selling strategy?
I'll start with what I said a little bit earlier. There's only so many models, right? Again, first touch, last touch, some weighting of it, whatever the spin is, right? And arguably none of that really changes if you're breaking everything into a category, right? So I would argue like there really isn't a driver from a business standpoint to change your attribution model once you've established it. However, if you do actually need to, like there are situations, say you're doing a large M&A between two
Yeah.
companies and they have two different models and you got to figure out how to combine that. At the end of the day, what you want to do is try to make sure that you are able to restate your historicals as closely to the model that you're landing on in terms of consolidated team. Because going back to Jordan's point, you want to be able to use your data to drive your decision-making process around your investments, right?
That's a good distinction.
Yeah, I think there, like Stephanie said, there's not many examples of when you probably should, although everybody will want to. Every new marketing leader will want to. You should avoid. You know, everybody's going to want to. The other exception I would introduce over and above the one Stephanie said would be that you enter a partner channel model. So a lot of younger organizations don't have a partner ecosystem, don't have a partner channel, and usually when you introduce that, you do have to change your model because there's a certain volume of pipeline that's going to stop coming from one direction because partners are going to take it. But hopefully it increases the overall size of the pie.
Got it. You guys are esteemed revenue operations leaders. What are you doing today differently because the market conditions are so different? Do you have any advice for the folks on the phone that on Zoom that you're doing differently? Any best practice that you can pass on to folks that they can implement immediately when they go back to work? Like, what is that one aha moment? Like for me, Stephanie, it's around like pipeline inspection. Like, let's spend more time inspecting the pipeline. I love that idea for marketing teams to start doing that. Any other advice that you can give folks that you guys are implementing internally?
Keep it simple is
Okay.
the number one thing I would say. It's like the three things I would tell somebody is keep it simple always, right? When economic changes happen and market changes happen, people tend to want to also go change their model, their go-to-market strategy, their attribution model, all those things. Say no, drag your feet, drag the hell out of those feet, because you're gonna ruin all your data that's gonna help you get through this hard time. Right, the data that you've built over the past 3 years, yeah, the market changes. The data is still way more valuable as it currently is than if you change your model and ruin the whole thing. Because guess what's going to happen? 2 years from now, it's going to be a whole new market again, anyways, and then you're going to have to do this again.
Yeah.
Don't get into that trap, right? So drag your feet, say no. If anybody wants to change your model, you have to explain to me why our current model isn't giving us the data we need to make the right decisions. And if you can't do that, I'm not changing it. That's the reality of this. And the last thing is, as you think about your model, we tend to, operators in general tend to, because we're Switzerland, but we're generally nice people, I think. So we kind of come into it with this like, you start thinking about it. What should my model be so it's fair, right? That's the way we tend to think about attribution. That's not the way you think about attribution. Is what should my model be so that I get the data I need to make the best decisions. fairness is not, I mean, fairness is a piece of that. Obviously, if the model is entirely unfair and skewed towards sales, you won't get the best data. But the reality is what you're really trying to do is get data. I'm not trying to make sure that my marketing and sales leaders both look good. That's not my job. My job is to
And
get.
and they like me, right? That's not your
Right.
job.
Yeah,
You don't care
no,
that they like me or
exactly.
not.
So those would be like the three things. Like, don't change, don't panic, don't throw your attribution model away because we're in a recession. Like that doesn't immediately ruin that. Just stick to status quo and
Got
keep
it.
it simple.
Stephanie, do you have any best practice?
Yeah, I think to me it's about removing as much internal friction as you can, right? In times of abundance, you just naturally have a higher tolerance for errors, right? In time of constraints, you've got to be really rigorous about alignment there, remove all your internal friction, make sure everyone understands like what is that North Star goal that you're all trying to march towards, right? Make sure you have much stricter adherence to your operational cadence, that you have your processes documented. I know in times of abundance, we've probably, that became a nice to have because everyone's just like running after the dollars as fast as they can, right? In time of constraint, it becomes much more important that you understand what your process looks like and that you have strict adherence to it, so you understand what's coming out and how you use that data, right, to drive your investment opportunities. And I think the third is, collaboration requires you to have common success metrics. So remove all those debates. Earlier we said, pipeline council is not useful if it's just like a battleground for crediting, right? So remove those debates, like set the common success metric. It doesn't matter if marketing hits their DG goals, but overall pipeline is still short. We either win as a team or we lose as a team, right? And like getting everyone to think about that as their like primary, as their team one is critical, especially now.
I think that's really important. Just to ask a tactical question, since a question just popped up. This is around attribution. Here's an example. Sales enterprise AE generates an opportunity in an account. Marketing then does a webinar or an event that someone else from that prospect account shows up for. Then 3 months later, the deal closes. Who gets how much credit?
I mean, as much as we're on a webinar right now, I don't give a lot of stock to webinar leads. So I would just, that's not doing it for me. But
what's the real answer though? I get that the webinar, but then somebody else attended. So
yeah,
obviously the account rep gets the bulk of the credit because, they created the opportunity and then marketing helped with a multi-touch. But what is that real answer?
I like to introduce time constraints in some of these things. So, if an AE generates a lead and 2 months later or 2 years later, that lead, like nothing's happening in between. 2 years later, that lead, attends a webinar and then is back into the sales cycle and starts to purchase. That should be probably marketing credit. So for me, it's really, again, sticking with that four-legged stool, but you kind of, I guess, have a period of time where credit is removed, so to speak, and somebody else is going to get to overwrite. So if an AE creates a lead and a month later they go to a webinar, yeah, that should still be sales's scenario. But a lot of the time we see stuff where an AE creates a lead and then, a year and a half or 2 years later, they show back up and nothing, that AE has not done anything in between. In fact, they don't even work there anymore. Sales shouldn't be getting credit for that. So it's really about, what's your overwrite period, so to speak, on what that primary attribution is.
Okay. And then last question. What do we love the most? First touch, last touch, or equal touch?
depends on the stage of your company. If you're really young, first touch is great. I'm just trying to figure out how to get people to talk to me, right?
Yeah.
As you evolve, first touch won't be as helpful because there's much more. You're going to go up market. First touch isn't going to be as helpful when you're talking about closing large scale enterprise deals with multiple stakeholders and a lot of people that need to sign and review. And that point, you're going to want to get to something that's more probably weighted to a version. I would probably still present some version of like first touch to the board because it's simple and easy to explain, and then internally have a multi-touch weighted attribution model that I use, that I trust, that I make decisions off of, because I don't have to explain that, but it's going to help us make the right By the way, I stole that from Greg. This is a thing that he created or told me about years ago, which is have two models, one that you present to people for the board and one that actually helps you decide things. So my preference depends on where you're at in your life cycle as a company.
Got it. Stephanie? Same.
Your stuff early on, like all you care about is where's the leads coming from, right? As you get later, bigger, more complex, you introduce your channel, right? Like it depends on what you're trying to track, right? If you're really trying to track like who creates that opportunity, then there'll be last touch. So again, there is no right model. It's really understanding like what your business goals are, pick the model, and then go.
Yeah,
And go
and it depends on your like serviceable addressable market too, right? So if I'm selling higher ed technology, that's a pretty, in the US only, for instance, like that's a pretty narrow market. I can't use first touch because I'll have first touched everybody within like a year or two. And so that's not going to be an informative model. So there's other factors you have to take into play with this.
Absolutely. Fantastic. You guys, I thought this was such an awesome group of speakers, and this has been such a huge learning experience, I think, for all of us on the Zoom as well. So I really appreciate your time today. So thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Jordan, and Greg as well. This has been such a great session. It'll also be recorded as well. Greg, is there anywhere on your website people can dig into more about multi-touch or attribution models? Do you have any ebooks or white papers that folks can dig into? Or Stephanie, if you've done other presentations around that, Jordan as well, is there any other resources we can offer to our folks who registered and attended?
I'll give a shameless plug for Jordan that also benefits me, which is go listen to the Attribution podcast that Jordan and I recently did. I think that's a good place to start.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that was what I was going to plug as well. So perfect.
I didn't even know that existed, so that's great. Awesome. Stephanie, have you done any presentations or any resources that you kind of steer your team to kind of review and learn from?
So I haven't done, like Jordan and Greg, I have not done any other. This is my first podcast on the attribution model itself. But I think going back to a question that's earlier around machine learning and AI, there's a ton of materials currently being published around, especially around like how do you operate in times of constraint. McKinsey studies coming out around AI, how AI is going to really be changing the landscape of sales and marketing, and how does automation play into it. So I don't know if it's specific to attribution, but I'm finding a lot of those resources super helpful as I kind of think about the evolution of revenue operations and how do we actually leverage machine learning, AI, generative AI to be more efficient in what we do.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. This was a great start to our day, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.